Hey fish friends, Zenzo with Tazawa Tanks, back with another video. So today's video I'm going to focus on keeping African cichlids in a medium-sized tank, a small to medium-sized tank. There's a lot of great YouTubers out there that have beautiful tanks. I watch those videos, I follow those videos. I wish I could have tanks like them. They've got 125s, 150s, 180s, 220s, 300-gallon tanks. I've seen some 500-gallon tanks. That Jay Wilson's got a 500-gallon tank coming. So there's some really nice, larger tanks that are available in the fish keeping hobby, and a lot of African cichlid keepers have those. But I'm going to focus on kind of the small to medium-sized tanks. For those of us that don't have the space. In my case, I don't have the space, not because I don't have the space as far as like room for it, but my floors can't handle that much weight. So I am limited in that capacity because I'm not on a concrete slab like I am in the basement, in the fish room. So I'm going to be talking about smaller tanks, 75-gallon tanks, 60s, 55s, 40 breeders, that kind of thing. So, as I said in the intro, there are a lot of, wonderful tanks out there on YouTube, and a lot of, great African cichlid fish keepers that have beautiful display tanks that are, 125, 150s, 180s, 220s, so on and so forth, just bigger tanks. That's not what I do, and it's not because I don't want a really large tank. I would love to have a couple of 125s or a 180. But for me, I don't have the ability to have those inside of my house because I am on an upper level. The living space is on an upper level. My fish room downstairs is on a concrete slab. So I could do a much larger tank down there. I could do 300 or 400 gallons, no problem. But it's in the fish room, it's in the basement. It's not an area that I spend a lot of time in, and I like to have my display tanks where I can just sit and relax and, watch the fish or take a nap or read a book in front of them. And so that's why I have smaller tanks in my display areas. And for a lot of viewers, that's probably the same case where you don't have the either the space or the resources to have a larger tank, and so you are restricted to having smaller tanks. But if you have a smaller tank, it doesn't mean that you can't have African cichlids. It just means that you have to be more selective in the type of African cichlids that you keep and how you keep them. So, in a smaller body of water, you have to be more diligent with your water parameters, with your filtration, with your water changes, your feeding schedule, etc. Also, in a smaller space, you have to be cognizant of the type of fish that you're keeping as far as the species and their maximum size, and also how to deal with aggression. So, as far as keeping African cichlids, they are an easy fish to keep as far as their hardiness and their ability to thrive in home aquariums. But oftentimes they're difficult to keep for beginners or not very experienced fish keepers because of the aggression. And there are numerous ways of dealing with aggression. What I found for my tanks is overstocking tends to be the best, and that's what you're seeing here. You're seeing, a lot of fish in this is a 75-gallon tank. So I kind of put that at the top level of the medium-sized tanks. So I think when you start getting, maybe you can even say a 90, because a 90 is a similar footprint. It's just a little bit deeper, or depth back. But really, 75, I'm talking about, 55s, 60s, 65, 75-gallon tanks, even 40 breeders on the smaller side for African cichlids. So, I deal with aggression with overstocking, and that's what works for me. I've tried different methods, and it just seems to work best. I've also found different species deal with aggression differently. So when I go over to the Mbuna tank, I'll talk a little bit about that. But anyway, you can keep African cichlids in a 75-gallon tank or in a 55 or a 60. You just have to have really good filtration. So for me, I have 3 filters on this tank. I have a 20-gallon wet-dry sump with a refugium with a giant pothos growing in it. I have a canister filter on here. I have a Fluval 406 with a ton of biological media. And I have a Marineland Penguin 350 hanging on the back. That's where I keep my polishing, filter floss, and cartridges, and my Purigen, etc. So I've got 3 different systems on here working to help with the filtration, and and I do water changes about every 3 to 4 days, and I'm doing probably about a 70% water change on average. So this tank is getting 70-75% water change. So this tank is getting turned over about 1.5 times per week, meaning 150% water changes per week on average. So that ensures that my nitrates stay in the 20 to 30 range tops, always below 40. I don't have ammonia and nitrite issues because of the filtration and because I'm on top of it. And I don't have a lot of aggression issues because of the overstocking. I do have one male that's downstairs in the fish room, and he's in a timeout, and he's going to stay down there for a while until I can get some of these to grow out a little bit larger. So because he was kind of keeping some of the fish in one corner and kind of occupying one part of the tank, and I just didn't like it. So no fish were getting beat up. It just didn't look aesthetically pleasing with all the fish kind of bunched up in 2/3 of the tank. As far as keeping fish, what types of fish you want to keep. This is a peacock and hap tank, but I will caution you on the haps. You can't do large predatory haps. You have to do smaller haps that aren't going to get larger than, let's say, 6 inches. The largest hap that I have in here is the largest fish in here, and that is the OB that you can see right there in the foreground, kind of in the front left area. And I'm not quite sure, because he's an OB, whoa, look, he needs to open his mouth. Not quite sure exactly what his parents were. But I've had him for a couple of years now. He's pretty much full grown. He's a solid 6 inches or so. I think it's probably a comp as far as his species of hap, or part comp. Kind of has that shape. I don't think eye biter, but anyway, I don't have a lot of large haps in here. I have a couple smaller haps. And then peacocks, and the peacocks generally stay smaller than the haps. I'm looking at anywhere from 4 to 6 inches. Some of my peacocks, even though I've had them for quite a while, like that OB there in the left side, that OB I've had for 2.5 years, and it's just it's 3.5, 4 inches, and that's as big as it's gotten, and I don't anticipate that fish getting any larger. So in this tank, that's what works. If I wanted to have larger fish, if I wanted to have, Livingstoni or Venustus or some of the large predatory haps, I can't do it in this tank. I'd have to get a 6-foot tank. That was, 125 minimum, preferably larger than that. So, but anyway, this is an option for you if you do have a smaller tank, or if you only have room for a 4-foot tank. You can definitely do African cichlids. You just have to do smaller fish and make sure that you're really on top of the water parameters. Now I'm talking about African cichlids. I am ignoring smaller African cichlids. I'm not talking about jewel cichlids. I'm not talking about the Lake Tanganyikan cichlids like the shell dwellers and the Cyprochromis and things like that, because obviously you can do those in much smaller tanks. I've got shell dwellers in a 10-gallon tank downstairs. I've got a bunch over here as well in a 60, but they're tiny, right? So they can live in a very small area, as can, Cyprochromis. You could probably do Cyprochromis and maybe a 29 or something like that. So, but I'm just talking about the larger Malawi cichlids. Here I am at my 65-gallon tank, a tank that I have Mbuna in. So Mbuna is another Malawi cichlid. They like the same water parameters, high pH, but They are a little bit different as far as their behavior, socially, how they act with one another, also their diet. So they are primarily they're an opportunity eater, of course. So they will eat animal proteins when available to them, and they do in the wild, but they're also grazers, so they typically graze on algae in their natural environment. So they would have a higher vegetable-based diet than your peacocks and haps, which are going to be more on your animal protein-based diet. But anyway, this is another example of a tank where that you can have African cichlids. That's not a large tank, so it's very common for people to have mbuna in, let's say, a 55-gallon tank as an example. This is a 65-gallon tank. However, it's a 65 tall, so it's the same footprint of a 40 breeder, but just taller. So think about like a 20 long versus a 29. Same thing, where it's a similar footprint, but 29 is taller than a 20 long. So this is taller than a 40 breeder, but similar footprint. So it's not a 4-foot tank. It is a 3-foot tank. But if you have the right mix of fish, and if you have adequate hiding spots for them, you can be successful. One of the things that I found with mbuna that's different than peacocks and haps is my experience over the years, and I've been keeping mbuna for about 15 years or so. So I've had a lot more experience with mbuna than any other type of fish. My experience is if they have a lot of hiding spots, then they're fine. If you have just a little bit of hiding spots, you get a lot of fighting because they're going to fight over those areas. And if you have no hiding spots, the fish don't feel safe because they, by nature, are more of a rock dweller than, let's say, a peacock or a hap, which is a more of an open water type fish. So in this tank, I've got a lot of rock work. That piece on the right is hollow, all kinds of hiding spots. You can't see it, but I have, I think, 5 different PVC tubes hiding in there underneath the rock work and behind the rock work as well. So there's additional caves for the fish to hide and feel secure. So I also do the overstocking method. I find that that works well for mbuna. My experience is they don't need to be as overstocked as peacocks, as an example, if you don't want to. But it does help. It does help to kind of, spread out the aggression. For example, like with my yellow labs, which are typically not an aggressive fish, but I do have a couple big males in there that tend to kind of bully some fish. And because I have 6 or 7 of them in here, it kind of spreads it out. So it works out well. Again, you have to have a lot of filtration if you're going to overstock and if you're going to keep African cichlids in a small tank, or a medium-sized tank, I should say. So in this tank, I have a wet-dry sump. I have with a lot of biological media in that wet-dry sump. I have a hang-on-the-back filter that's full of lava rock with a pothos plant growing out of it. And I have a small canister filter, which is used for mechanical filtration and some of my chemical filtration. That's where I keep my Purigen, etc. And then I have a small sponge, a pre-filter sponge on a power head as well. It's just kind of a small filtration unit. So again, similar to the other tank as far as, the parts per million and the nitrates, it's, 30 or less, 30 parts per million or less. Typically right around 20. I do bi-weekly water changes of, probably, actually, I did one today and I measured it. It was about 75% as well. So they're getting, 100 to 150% water changes per week as well. So again, you can do these in a 55. You could do them in a 40 breeder if you didn't have a whole lot of them. Maybe like around 15 or so. I have a 40 breeder downstairs and I had about 15 fish in there. Again, you just have to have lots of water changes and lots of filtration. So there's a lot of great videos out there, as I shared, but a lot of big tanks, and not all of us can have those big tanks. So I hope you enjoyed that video. I hope it was informative, and I hope that I've given you some food for thought as far as keeping fish and different choices that you have. So again, as always, I thank you for your viewership. Please subscribe if you haven't. Give it a thumbs up if you like the video. Please comment, and if you haven't subscribed, or if you are subscribed, click the little notification bell down below, as that will notify you on my next video. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.